Okay, so get this. We're diving into Elder Gong's talk, All Things for Our Good. And honestly, even I have to admit, and I always look for the silver lining, but the idea that everything can be for our good, that's a lot.
It is a bold statement for sure. It's interesting. This whole concept has been around forever. Like theologians and philosophers have been going back and forth on it for centuries. But what Elder Gong does, and it's really cool actually, is he takes this huge theological idea and makes it make sense in our everyday lives.
And he starts right off the bat connecting this all things working together thing to, get this, creation itself. And then he ties it to Easter, which really makes you think. It's almost like he's saying there's a connection between the hope of the resurrection and this promise that God can work through anything, even the hard stuff.
And he doesn't shy away from that hard stuff, does he? Remember that story he tells about the Chinese farmer? Everything that happened to that guy, good or bad, it didn't matter. His response was always, "We'll see."
Oh, man, that story sticks with you. It's like a reminder that we're not always going to have all the answers, right? Like what we think is a bad thing now might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise.
Exactly. And I love that it's not about just giving up and being passive. It's more like recognizing that we don't see the whole picture, that there's something bigger happening that we maybe won't understand until later. And he doesn't just stop at be patient, he takes it a step further and brings in the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so God's on our side, I get that. But how does that actually work? Like, how does the atonement fit into all of this?
That's where it gets really, really interesting. Because he's not just talking about the atonement in the traditional way, like just about sin. He's talking about how Christ really truly understands our pain, our heartaches, even our sorrows.
Yeah, he even uses the word loneliness,
Hmm.
which is so personal. It's like he's saying Christ's empathy is real. It's not just some idea up in the clouds. It comes from actually experiencing what it's like to be human.
Exactly. He's
Yeah.
making this really powerful connection between the divine, like Christ's empathy, and our human experiences. This isn't some far off God just giving us empty words. It's about a savior who gets us, who gets what we go through on such a deep level.
That's actually really comforting, but it's not like we can just sit back and expect things to magically work out, right? I mean, Elder Gong also talks about really trusting God, overcoming our weaknesses, and even seeing trials as opportunities to grow. So it's like we have to do something too, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting he talks about putting off the natural man, because it'd be easy to misinterpret that. It's not about denying who we are or pretending our emotions aren't real. It's more about like recognizing those things in us that make us selfish or prideful or just not very kind. It's about trying to be more like Christ, more loving and more forgiving and more willing to put others first.
So we're not talking about like denying who we are, but becoming better, more like Christ. And that's part of what helps all things work out right.
You got it. And when you think about it, it's usually when things are hard that we grow the most. Like, think about a time you learned about yourself, about how strong you are, how to care for other people. Weren't those times when you had to overcome something?
Yeah, it's like that saying, what is it? Smooth seas never made a skilled sailor.
Exactly. But Elder Dawn gets that it's not always easy going through those rough times. He even warns about giving those cheesy responses, those cliches to people who are hurting. Sometimes what people need is just to know they're not alone.
Yeah, and he has those great stories in his talk, like that one about the stake president diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Talk about a tough situation, but he finds strength in his faith, his family, and serving others.
And by doing that, he ends up inspiring everyone around him. Which reminds me of another thing Elder Gong talks about community. We're not supposed to go through hard things alone. We've got our families, our friends, our church family.
It's interesting. He talks about finding joy, even in the hard times. He's saying that serving other people, helping them, can actually help us heal and feel strong too.
Such a good point. It's not about pretending everything is fine, but recognizing that sometimes real joy comes when we focus on something bigger than us, when we reach out to other people.
And for members of the Church of Jesus Christ, temple covenants are a big part of that, right? He spends a lot of time talking about temples and how they help us see the big picture, the eternal perspective.
Absolutely, but we should probably explain that a little bit for those who might not be familiar with Latter-day Saint beliefs.
A good idea. So for those listening who aren't familiar, temples are basically these sacred places where members of the church make serious promises with God.
And those promises, or covenants, are seen as a source of strength and guidance. They help us connect with God. And Elder Gong's point is that participating in those temple ceremonies and keeping those promises, it can give us hope and help us see things more clearly, especially when life is tough.
Just like those covenants become this, like, anchor, you know?
Yeah.
They help us remember that this life is just a small part of something so much bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And that perspective is huge when we're going through those times where it's like, how could anything good come from this, you know? It's about trusting that even when we don't get it, God
Just
does.
surrendering to something bigger than us.
Yeah.
Trusting that even if it doesn't make sense right now, there's a reason.
Exactly. And it's not about just blindly believing or pretending that we're not hurting or struggling. Remember how Elder Gong talked about those cliche answers? Like, sometimes the best thing we can do for someone who's hurting is just listen, be there with them, not try to fix it.
Yeah, just be present with them and let them know they're not alone.
Exactly. And honestly, that in itself can be pretty powerful, right? Like just that act of being there for someone, it shows that even in the hard times, we can still find connection. We can still have compassion and hope.
It's like a living example of that idea that all things can work for good.
I think so. So as we wrap up here, what really stuck out to you from Elder Gong's message? Like, what was the biggest takeaway for you?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think for me, it's that reminder that faith, it's not about avoiding the hard things in life. It's about facing them head on, knowing that we have a God who gets it, who's with us even in those dark moments, and who can actually use those experiences to make us stronger, make us better.
That's beautiful. I love that. And it makes you wonder, what would our lives look like if we really, truly believed that? That even the hard stuff is working for our good? How would that change how we see things, the choices we make, how we treat other people?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? And on that note, we'll leave you with that thought. Keep searching, keep asking those big questions, and until next time, keep on diving deep.